Hello, everyone, and today we're going to enter into the world of political aesthetics and examine an introduction to the concept of political aesthetics. So, political aesthetics is a subdivision of political philosophy and to some extent political theory, although most standard political science students probably remain unfamiliar with the concept of political aesthetics. It is mostly to be found in the domain of philosophy and political philosophy, perhaps naturally so, since aesthetics is one of core the core fields of philosophy given to us by Aristotle, and it is a primary concern for philosophers rather than political scientists. But political aesthetics has been an important topic of political philosophy ever since the publication of Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France. For Burke's critics, his sudden criticism of the French Revolution was shocking, if not an act of apostasy given his previous support for the American Revolution. For Burke and his defenders, both in his time and today, there was a remarkable consistency in his political outlook from the 1750s through the time of his death in 1797. That consistency being found in his aesthetics. Edmund Burke's inquiry into the sublime and the beautiful is therefore the foundational text in entering into the field of political aesthetics, for it charted out the aesthetics of the sublime and the beautiful, all the way back in 1757. While Burke defended the reality and the importance of the sublime, it is also clear from reading the text that he favors the beautiful over the sublime as a matter of personal taste. That is perhaps the place of grand misunderstanding and consternation among Burke's former supporters, who were shocked when he broke with the more radical Whigs and his protege Charles Fox, and stood on the side of William Pitt and the anti-revolutionary Tory government, was that they read Burke as favoring the sublime instead of the beautiful. As David Wormersley writes concerning Burke's political attitudes and emotions, when you look at his support for the American Revolution and then you compare that with his criticism of the French Revolution, you see that the language that he used in his support of the American colonies, the cardinal political emotions, were of love and affection, which is characteristic of the beautiful, not reverence and awe. And reverence and awe is something more indicative of the emotions produced by the sublime. The subdivision of political philosophy concerned with political aesthetics examines the nature of the political and political ideology from aesthetic attitudes rather than ideology. Burke, for many reasons, is foundational not only for giving the first systematic treatise of the sublime and the beautiful, but for also being seen as a founding father of modern conservatism and the reactive force against the revolutionary and social engineering society as opposed to the natural and organic society, which of course is a major theme in the Reflections, also a major theme in his Letters of Regicide Peace, and a theme already prefigured in his earliest writing, A Vindication of Natural Society. Aesthetic choices and tastes are instrumental for understanding political predisposition from those of us who study or are involved in the study and the writing of political aesthetics. Burke argues that the sublime, so I'm going to give a basic definition here of the sublime and the beautiful as it relates to aesthetics, that the sublime is productive of the strongest emotion which the mind is capable of feeling. So the sublime produces passion, reverence, emotion. Those emotions, according to Burke, are primarily danger, pain, and terror. Those are the strongest emotions which we are capable of feeling, according to Burke. The beautiful, by contrast, is distinguished from the sublime by that quality or those qualities in bodies by which are caused the passion of love. The emotion or feeling of love produces a feeling of pleasantry, joy, and restfulness. The sublime, however, is the greatest power of aesthetics, and it exhausts itself in astonishment, awe, reverence, pain, terror, dread, and horror. The beautiful, as mentioned, is a more tempered quality, leading to felicity and rest. The sublime, Burke tells us, leads to that dread and reverence. The beautiful, by comparison, submits to us and leads to reciprocal union between the object of love and the lover, while, with regards to the sublime, we as humans bow and submit to that which is sublime, whether it's at a distance or up close. Thus, power and terror, as well as darkness and obscurity, define the sublime. Fragility, love, and revealing or exposure define the beautiful. In other words, the beautiful is something you can get to know. The sublime is something you don't really understand or that you can never fully get to know. You always encounter the sublime either in darkness or at a distance. There are many layers to reading the sublime and the beautiful, and while Burke certainly thinks the sublime is good when encountered at a distance, leading to a good humbling and feeling of insignificance in the person, which provides perspective regarding humanity's place in the great chain of being, there is also the reality of closeness in Burke's reflections on the sublime. The sublime, Burke informs us, is all about the frenzying of the passions. This desire, indeed near masochistic lust for the sublime, is the product of a bored and unexciting society. As general society leads to more leisure, less work, and more commonality, more banality, the desire deep within human beings for the sublime grows. Without work, the human impulse for the sublime materializes. The state of general inactivity, lack of excited movement, is the cause for the want of the sudden horrid convulsions of the sublime, which make the painful delightful. Indeed, Burke writes that pain can be delightful. This is what we would call the masochistic sublime. Delightful is different from pleasure, as Burke tells us, primarily because pleasure brings us a feeling of rest, felicity, and joy, while delight doesn't necessarily produce that. Delight can be produced even from self-inflicted pain, or pain inflicted by another person. Furthermore, because man is a fundamentally hierarchical animal, the desire for egalitarianism is really a byproduct of the masochistic sublime at work, instead of a genuine, pleasant egalitarianism motivated by the beautiful. People submit to dictatorial politics, the dictatorial politics of egalitarianism, whether of the left or the right, which would move us away from egalitarianism and back to more hierarchy, because people are drawn to the aesthetic spectacle of power and horror. As Burke tells us, despotic governments are founded on the passions of men. And the French Revolution, despite all of its apologies, was definitely energized by a irrational passion, as it was the lack of labor, the boredom of unemployment, that reactualized the spirit of self-preservation. And Burke also tells us that the sublime is rooted in our primordial impulse for self-preservation. The desire for a better future, which is not rational but passionate, leads to people submitting before power to make manifest that lust deep in their souls. What is clear from Burke's aesthetics is that the sublime is characterized by frenzy, deep yearnings, passion, and terror. The beautiful is characterized by restfulness, pleasure, and love. The defining aesthetic for conservatism is the beautiful, for conservatives see the fragility of the beautiful, and to quote Cicero, admirable systems, which are very easily toppled and destroyed, which would bring widespread harm to the masses of people who benefit, perhaps unconsciously, from such systems guiding and protecting and providing for them. Revolutionary movements, both of the progressive and reactionary stripe, are defined by the aesthetic of horror, dread, and terror, of passion, power, pomp, and shock. And when we look at movements today, uh, you should understand that those people who claim to be on the side of reason are actually on the side of passion, on the side of the sublime, not of rational conservatism. And who can deny, given this reality of political aesthetics, that all the great totalitarian movements, whether communist or fascist, have been masters at materializing the passions of the people and have been masters at the aesthetics of the sublime? Just look at the great aesthetics and propaganda and the music of the Soviet Union, fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, Red China, North Korea, and to some extent even North Vietnam during the Vietnam War era. However, there seems to be a defining break between the revolutionary sublime of the left and the reactionary sublime of the right. This is also an area of focus in political aesthetics. The reactionary sublime is an attempt to save man, human nature, and the reality of hierarchy. The reactionary agrees with Burke that there is a deep aesthetic soul to human nature, and this lust for the sublime is the defining characteristic of that peculiar creature known as man. For the reactionary, the movement to the pleasant or the eradication of the sublime in its entirety is the eradication of man and the creation of a new species altogether. Thus, the reactionary defense of the sublime is paradoxically a defense of humanism in its truest ontological and etymological sense, for it is a defense of that very nature that defines humanity, and that nature, again, is the want for the sublime. The sublime of the revolutionary left, at least if you accept the perspective of the sublime from the reactionary, is therefore a false sublime. It is a temporary actualization of the sublime to be eventually discarded as we move into the end of history state of utopian communism. From the purview of political aesthetics, the sublime emerges in history like the dictatorship of the proletariat. The revolutionary sublime of the left is something temporary, but necessary in the movement to utopia. But just as Friedrich Engels said that the state would wither away after the threat of counter-revolution has been eradicated, so too does the sublime dictatorship of the revolution therefore wither away after it has achieved its goals, to forcibly create, like God, the perfect society. The leftist welcomes the sublime as a temporary movement in humanity's progression into a new creature, and indeed a new society. The reactionary flies back to the sublime as the salvation of human nature in a world where eros and the sublime is being destroyed for the pleasurable felicity of the beautiful in conservatism, or the mechanical utopian lifestyle of liberalism and the broader revolutionary left, that life of just pure, unadulterated material pleasure. Political aesthetics make sense of the so-called horseshoe theory in this manner. The closeness of the far left and the far right is because of aesthetics. Both embrace the sublime, but for very, very, very different reasons. But the reemergence of the sublime is the result of a tired, worn out, and unexciting life. That is what Burke made clear in his inquiry into the sublime and the beautiful. For Burke saw two societies: the society of the sexes, the society of fight or flight, of self-preservation, the society in which you are perpetually inculcated and embodied by fear and dread, and the great society, the good society, which is basically civil society, which moves us towards the pleasurable. Burke again saw this deep aesthetic yearning in the souls of men and said we need room for the sublime. Traditionally, the sublime then is encountered in nature or in religion. The thrill of fight or flight, life or death, or as Burke said, self-preservation, is what opens the eyeballs to the glorious fire and masochistic pain that runs deep in the blood of humans. Anybody who suggests that this aesthetical yearning for the sublime is not within humans, just hasn't studied the human animal enough. And as another famous Briton said, nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result. Our aesthetic choices and our aesthetic feelings are in fact part of the political. And this is what political aesthetics attempts to study: how our aesthetic desires, our aesthetic choices, and our aesthetic preferences lead us to political predispositions. Thank you.